Welcome to Better Cataract Surgery Through Donuts. I'm your narrator, M.N. Wiggins, here in beautiful Davis Street Studios. And if you are looking for something fun and lighthearted to read other than optics, you're welcome to go to davisstreetpublishing.com, click on any of the tabs at the top, and you can see all the fun, lighthearted stuff that I write. So we're going to jump right into what we affectionately call the donut module. And this is something that I've used for the past several years to teach residents how to do cataract surgery, at least the nucleus disassembly technique. Now, you're going to need to get some donuts to do this module along with me, and I highly, highly encourage you to do that. You're going to need donut holes, and not just any kind of donut. It will need to be a thick cake donut. You can't use the fluffy kind. They just don't work, and at the end of the module, I'll show you why. But find that thick, dense donut hole. And we're going to do this module together. What I've found in my experience is that the residents that do this module learn how to crack a lot more efficiently. They really turn a corner when they're doing that. So we're going to talk about cracking, we'll talk about setup for cataract surgery, and we're going to talk about chopping.
So here's everything you're going to need. You're going to need a paper plate. You'll definitely need a pair of scissors. You're going to need some plasticware. To do it right, I think you ought to have a ruler and a marker. You can use any kind of marker you want to. The ones that we use to mark toric IOLs work great here. Probably going to need 2 knives for this experiment, so go ahead and get yourself a second knife. Now the spoon here, we're not going to use at all. It just kind of represents that one instrument on your cataract set that you've never used, and you likely will never use it. You don't know what it's called, how it got on your tray, but it seems to be on every tray you've ever seen. Step 1 is going to be to create the second instrument of choice. A lot of people use a curved instrument so that it has a 90-degree bend at the end, or maybe more than 90 degrees. That represents a Connor wand. The Nagahari, the Siebel does that. The Mahoney looks like that. There are lots of them that have this curve to it. Other people like to use a straight instrument like a cyclodialysis spatula for their cracking, or the Drysdale, or other instruments like that. If you're one of those people, then take your second instrument here and just kind of cut along here. But if you use the Connor or anything that has a 90-degree or more bend at the end, then what you're going to do is you're going to cut this out to about right here and then come this way so that you end up with a 90-degree bend. And I will cut that for you and show you what that looks like. Now, you may have picked a plastic knife that looks like this, and this is a more heavy duty than these thin plastic ones. They don't cut quite so easy, but they do chop really well. So whichever one you have, both will work.
As you choose the paper plate that you're going to use, I know that doesn't seem very important, but if you really want to go for a realistic experience, I would highly recommend using the smaller plate on the right and not a regular size plate. Now, as we prepare to do this, we're going to try to make this as realistic as possible, and so we're going to create our wound sizes at a constant ratio to what they would be under the microscope. So if we think about the white to white in an average eye being around 12, we oftentimes will make a 2.4 millimeter corneal wound. There is some variability there, but at least that's what we do at my institution. And the parablade is somewhere between 1 and 1.2 millimeters for most folks. So if I take that 12 millimeter white to white and I compare it to that smaller plate size, which I've measured out at 180 millimeters, then by similar fractions, I can find that the corneal wound that I'm going to need to draw with that marker on my plate should be 36 millimeters, and then the para port is going to be 18 millimeters. If you use a larger plate, just measure it out, see what the millimeter is, sub that in for 180, and then try to make your corneal wounds and your paras the correct length. I'm going to show you why that's important in just a second. But again, this makes it as realistic as possible, and you get the most out of the module.
So now you got your plate and you're all set up, and you may be wondering, where do I mark it and why is that important? As you can see here, I've got a main wound that I've made the proper length using my ruler, and then I've got my para over here, which is also the proper length. And the reason that that's important is because the ratio is the same, as we were talking about, to the cornea or paper plate. So this is very realistic. As I'm working the donut module, I will strive to stay within my wound with my phaco and within my para line here as I do my second instrument. And what you'll want to do during the donut module, what you're tempted to do is to kind of come up here to kind of make it work, whether we're chopping or cracking, but make yourself stay within the wound. That'll make this very realistic for you. You might ask, how far apart should these two wounds be? And notice right here that I've made my para 90 degrees away from my main. And the reason that I do that is because I like to use a bent second instrument like the Nagahari or the Connor or the Siebel, things like that. And the reason I do that is because it's very easy for me to chop this way, and it's very easy for me to crack this way, and I have all this pulling power right here. And so I think that I get the most out of the instrument by being 90 degrees away. If I were a straight instrument kind of guy, then I would want a wound right about here. Say I like to use cyclodialysis or Drysdale, one of those guys. Then if I'm cracking, because those instruments don't really chop, they're just for cracking. And so this right here is very easy to do if you're a little closer. If you go out here, that becomes a very difficult maneuver if you can do it at all. So for a non-bent second instrument, this is where you want your para. For a bent second instrument, I think 90 degrees away is the easiest way to go. As long as we're talking all of that, it is important, I think, to position your chair in between your wounds. As you're working with two hands, you really want your elbows to be at your sides and not in your stomach. So make sure that you position your chair so that your elbows go to your sides. It's also important that the patient's iris is level with the floor. It's also important that the microscope is perpendicular to the patient's eye. If it's not perpendicular, you're introducing Snell's law, and the more you tilt the scope, the more objects aren't where they appear to be. And we've got a lecture on that in optics, and we'll go back through that. But trust me, you want that scope to be as perpendicular as you can. You also want the bed to be high enough that your knees aren't hitting the bottom of it when you reach up and have your foot on the highest point on the pedals. It's also nice if you have the bed high enough so that the attending can get their legs under there as well, because it could be that they have to take over in the middle of a case, and you don't want to spend a lot of time readjusting if that has to happen. It's also a good idea to pay attention to your chair height. You want your chair high enough so that you can easily move your foot around on the pedal without shifting your weight, which shifts your hands, which may be inside the eye. And finally, we get to the donuts. So you can see here, I've got my sterile drape put down, and I have my nucleus, this donut ball here, and I have on my Mayo, I have my instruments. I've got the crazy, whatever the heck that is that I'm never going to use, so I just get rid of that. You can see here that I've put a toothpick through the middle. Now this is for demonstration purposes. I don't want you to do this. It's just for you to get an idea of the depth that I'm going. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use our phaco to make a groove. Now, when you're using your phaco in the donut module to hold it for chopping, cracking, things like that, this is going to be your phaco. But when we're grooving, just take your second knife. Okay, so here we go. We're going to go through our main wound, and we're going to start to groove. And here I am. I'm going to kind of hold it here with my fingers. Now, normally I would say be careful not to cut yourself, but it is a plastic knife, and you are all very intelligent people, so I'm not going to say that. If you manage to injure yourself with a plastic knife, I don't know. Bless your heart. So here we go. We're grooving down here, and I'm going to stop as often we do when we're first learning how to groove, because we're afraid that we're going to groove too deep and go through the posterior capsule, and so we're very cautious. And cautious is a great thing. But what happens when I stop and I'm above the geometric center of my lens? I haven't grooved to that point, and now I'm going to put my second instrument, and see there, I've already gotten out of my main wound, shame on me. Here we go, I'm going in here, and I'm going to try to crack, and as I do that, what's going to happen, as you see here, is the top is going to start to come off like this. And so notice that I have not cracked all the way through. This is called shelving. And let's take a look at why shelving happens.
So during this module, I'm going to show you diagrammatically what I've just demonstrated with the donut. And here we have a yellow-brown nucleus. I've drawn a circle in the geometric center, and then I've drawn a horizontal line just to kind of highlight where the center is. And so here we have sculpted down not quite to the center, and the purple circle indicates your phaco tip, and the silver one indicates your second instrument. What we often will tell you as attendings is to put both instruments into the very bottom of the groove when you crack. Some people will say to have those side by side. Some people will teach you one in front of the other. But what's really most important is that both of them are in the bottom of the groove. And when we're starting out learning cataract surgery, it's very difficult for us to get those instruments into the bottom of the groove. I'm not sure why, but almost every resident I've ever trained, that's been an issue. It is something that you do learn. But starting out, we're typically too high. Now, in this instance, we've got the phaco tip all the way down on the bottom. The second instrument isn't quite low enough, but it's pretty close. Now, what early surgeons will tend to do is apply a horizontal force like this. And when you do that, that creates what's called shelving, as you saw with the donut here. And this is why, is that you've got so much cataract left inferiorly that it's just going to laugh at you. It's not going to crack at all. It's going to send that force completely horizontally.
Okay, round two. So I figured out that I did not groove deep enough. So I'm now going in, I'm still a beginning cataract surgeon, let's say, and I've convinced myself, or I've been told by my attending, that I must groove deeper and that it's okay, that I'm not, that attending is going to stop me before I go too deep or do anything bad. So here we go. Once again, this time I am in my main wound, and I'm going to start to groove, and I'm going to make sure that I get down deeper. So this time I'm going to go past the midpoint, say slightly past the midpoint. And so now I'm going to go in here, and again, here is my bent 90-degree instrument, and I'm now going to crack here, and I'm going to have slightly better luck, but it's still not going to be a really smooth break right here where I want it. It's still going to tend to shelve off. Now let's take a look at why that happened.
And so here I have learned again to sculpt deeper, and I'm past that midpoint line. And again, I've got my phaco down in the bottom of the groove. I'm not quite deep enough with my second instrument, but I'm very close. And so now again, because I'm learning as a surgeon, so to speak, I'm applying purely horizontal force like this, and it doesn't quite crack. Not the way we want it. It again shelves. And the reason that it does this is because when you apply purely horizontal action to it, you're actually sending the force around to the bottom like this, and you're reinforcing that plate so that not only does it not want to crack, you're preventing it from cracking by the way that you're directing these forces.
So here we go. It's round three. I'm now in my third ever cataract case, and I'm trying to get a good crack. That hasn't happened yet. And I've talked about it with my attending, and we think that what we really ought to do is groove deeper. I just wasn't deep enough on the first two. So this time I'm really going to groove quite deeply, almost to the point of being very scared that I'm going to go through the posterior capsule. But I trust my attending. My attending is going to stop me before that happens. So here we go. I'm grooving, and now I'm going to groove quite deeply. And you can see here, as I hold the donut up, I've come very close to that bottom plate. So it's getting a little dicey down there. But I've grooved very deeply, and now I'm going to go in with my second instrument, and I'm going to try to get them the same distance, and boom. I'm feeling very happy because now I've successfully cracked this lens in heminuclei. So I'm feeling really good about myself.
So this time I have sculpted very deeply. I have both of my instruments down in the bottom of the groove the way that I should. I'm going to apply that horizontal move, and at this point there's just not enough plate left to put up any resistance, and it will crack very nicely, and we're going to feel pretty good about ourselves by doing that, and it's going to look good.
So riding on the success of cracking your first lens, You're going to want to groove deeply several times on your next few cases. That's the tendency, but it's really not the best way to crack a lens. What you really want to do is not so much horizontal. You want to crack down and out as if you were working on an airline and you're showing people where the exits are. So it's down and out in a continuous motion. When you do that, you are going to change the physics such that it separates the plate and you don't have to groove down near as far to make that work. So here we go. Let me demonstrate it, and then I will show you diagrammatically why this works. But here we go. We're going to groove, and we're going to groove maybe halfway. We don't have to go any farther than that. So here it is. I'm maybe halfway, and then I'm going to have my phaco in here through my main wound. I'm going to have my second instrument through this wound. And now, instead of just horizontally moving these things, because when you watch someone crack, it looks like all they're doing is horizontal, but that's not true for people that crack really well. What you want to do and what they do is you push down and separate. And you see there how as before, when I was only halfway and I did that, it would shelve off. But when the physics are correct, I can stop grooving there and go down and outward, and it separates very nicely. So I want you to do that on several of these donut holes. So make your groove and then try to stay within your wounds if you can. And I want you to go down and outward. So pause this video until you feel like you've got a really good understanding for the physics. And I'll tell you, residents that do the donut module in the surgery that I've staffed, they really turn a corner once they get this concept and they start cracking very easily and very consistently. So give it a try, work lots of donuts, and then come back and we'll talk chopping.
And so here's a diagram of what you've just seen. We've sculpted down just beyond kind of the midpoint of that lens. We correctly have both instruments down at the bottom of the groove, but we're not going to do that purely horizontal move that we're tempted to do. We're going to go down towards the macula and then out. And we're going to not direct our forces horizontally, but direct them diagonally downward like this. And that forces that plate to crack very nicely. This is an efficient way to crack. You don't have to sculpt quite so deeply.
So you've successfully cracked into heminuclei, but you might be asking, what are the physics involved if I want to separate the heminuclei into a quadrant? So what you can do is, I will hold it like this, go ahead and make a groove. It's not going to be near as long as your main groove, but you do want it to be a little bit deep. And so we've grooved down here with our phaco, and then we're going to come through here with our second, and the physics are the same. You want to crack slowly, giving the tissue time to separate, but it's a down and outward move. And that is how you create quadrants. So practice that. So welcome back. We're finished with the cracking section. We're now going to go into chopping. And so there are lots of different forms of chopping, but, well, that's not true. There are lots of names for chopping. There are really only a couple different ways of doing it. But people have slight variations, and so you'll hear a lot of different names, but it all really boils down to the same physics. So the first thing we're going to learn is the horizontal chop, and this is kind of the first introductory kind of chopping that you should do. I recommend to do the groove and the correct physics to get it split into heminuclei, and then on the heminuclei start to do this horizontal chop, and it's the easiest way to learn it. And then once you become really comfortable, you can start doing it as your main chop without doing the cracking. So right now what we're going to do is the main, and here are the physics, and I'll show you again diagrammatically as always. But actually, I don't want a knife this time. I want my true phaco. So the key to chopping is to bury in and get a good purchase with your phaco. And once you've got your good purchase, you have to let off the ultrasound and hold in position 2 with the aspiration. I can't emphasize that enough. If you go in with phaco and you continue to phaco, you will quickly lose your purchase because phaco is sending out ultrasound waves trying to get rid of everything in front of it. And you don't want that to happen with a purchase. You want to hold on to it during the chop. So you have to just use aspiration and get off that phaco once you've got the purchase. The other key is that you have to phaco forward into the lens. A lot of early surgeons will kind of sit at the edge and phaco and then find that they don't have a good purchase because they don't want to go in all the way. But you've got to phaco as you're going forward and then quickly let off the phaco, hold on to the aspiration. It's a nuanced kind of thing, but you'll get there. So here we go. I'm going to phaco forward and I'm going to get a purchase. And I want to get a really good purchase here. The better the purchase, the easier the chop. I'm going to take my second instrument through my side port here. And now I'm going to, some people will go under the rexus to get to this point. Some people will pull the lens back slightly so that they don't have to go under the rexus very much. But what you're aiming to do is to get your second instrument down here kind of in line with your phaco if you can. Once you get it in line like this, what you're going to do is you're going to pull back, and then when you get right to where the phaco tip is, you're going to pull sideways. Notice the phaco doesn't move at all. After it's buried in there, it sits still. All the action is happening with your second instrument, and you've only got a few seconds to make it work before you lose that purchase. So get your second kind of hovering as you're burying in so that it can be one fluid motion. So here we go, I've buried in, and now I've got behind it like this. I'm going to bring it towards my phaco, and then I'm going to separate like that. And that donut wasn't very clean, but that is the idea. Now, what you'll be learning before then is to do this on heminuclei. So I bury in like this, I pull towards it to get away from that rexus, I go behind it, I get these instruments lined up, and I pull towards each other, and I separate. So that is horizontal chopping, and the first one that you'll be learning.
So here's a diagram of horizontal chopping, and you can see the blue circle is our capsular rexus, and it's just a beautiful diagram of a phaco tip. I'm not saying I'm an artist or anything, but I mean, that is really, really well done. And so the first thing we're going to do here is to bury in, and we've done that, and now we're very quickly going to take our second instrument, and we're going to go under the rexus and out, trying to line it up with the phaco, and then we're going to bring it towards the phaco in this direction, and that is going to start to split it. And once we get close to the phaco tip, and again, the phaco tip doesn't move, we're going to move it in this direction, and that's going to really broaden it like this.
So we've talked about horizontal chopping, we've talked about cracking. What's left? Vertical chopping. So in vertical chopping, what I'm going to do is in horizontal chopping, I came out here, but in vertical chopping, I'm going to go closer to it, definitely inside the rexus. I'm going to go downward vertically to create a plane, and then I'm going to move it towards my phaco. Again, the phaco holds pretty steady, and then I'm going to move it away, and that's going to create a vertical chop. Very handy, especially in lenses that don't want to rotate. So here we go. I've already buried in. I'm holding with aspiration, and I'm now well within my rexus. I'm going to go down fairly deeply, and now I'm going to move towards my phaco tip and then separate. You can see how well that separated. Donuts are great at simulating nuclei. Now I'm going to go after my heminucleus, and so again, I've buried in. I've got a great purchase. I'm not going to go horizontally. I'm going to go vertically somewhere closer, and I'm going to go down very deeply and then separate slowly, giving the tissue time to separate. And so that is vertical chopping.
So once again, we have a beautiful representation of a phaco tip, and we're going to phaco forward to get that great purchase. We're going to have our second instrument ready to go, and we're going to vertically impale the nucleus well inside of the rexus. You see in my diagram here, I'm using an instrument that has a ball on the end, But in reality, I probably would be using something a little sharper on the end, like a Nagahari or a Mahoney, just because those are easier to use. Now, I'm not going to impale so deeply that I'm going to threaten the posterior capsule, but I am going to get that nice deep vertical plane because that makes this so much easier. Once I get that phaco buried in, I'm pretty quickly going to be moving towards my phaco, which in my hands doesn't move. There are some people that say that as you're pushing down with the second, that you need to lift up with the phaco to create a vertical shearing plane. I don't find that necessary to make this work. After I go here, I then go 90 degrees away and create a larger plane.
So I told you that there were lots of different names for the chopping techniques, but they all really boil down to horizontal or vertical. There are subtle variations. If I have any claim to fame, I think this is it. This is the chopping technique that I like to believe that I invented. That may not be so. It could be that someone had invented it before I did and didn't really get the word out. But in any case, this is what I call groove and chop. I think it's a very easy way to chop. It gives me very straight lines. But here's what I do. So I take my phaco and I'm going to groove, but I'm only going to make 1 or 2 passes. It's a very shallow groove right there. And then I'm going to do vertical chopping inside of that groove. And so I'm going to bury into my groove right here. And once again, I'm getting a very healthy bite. And then I'm going to go through my side port, and I'm well within inside my rexus. I'm going to go down deep. I'm going to bring it towards my phaco, which doesn't move, and then I'm going to separate. And that is the groove and chop by M.N. Wiggins, or maybe by somebody before me, but my only claim to fame. So what else do we have to talk about? Well, we started off saying that it was very important that we get cake donuts because they have the right consistency to mimic a cataract. But I was wondering what would happen if I got one of those other kinds, kind of one of those fluffy air-filled donuts. How well would that chop? And would that simulate trying to chop in a really soft lens? I have no idea. So here we go. We're going to do the experiment. I've got this fluffy thing here, and I don't know. Let's tell you what. Let's do some cracking and see what happens. So I'm going to groove. I'm going to groove down a little past halfway like I normally would. And then I'm going to go with my second instrument through here, and I'm going to do the proper physics down and out. Yeah, I don't know. See, that's just kind of mushy. Nah, that's, no, I don't like that at all. Tell you what, I'll throw one more on here. Let's see if it chops. Let's do a little groove and chop here. So let me get my phaco over here. I'm gonna bury deep, see if I can get these fluffy donuts. Don't buy these donuts. These are fluff. I mean, yeah, just not for this. Okay, so, but here we go. We're gonna try it anyway. We're gonna go deeply down in here. We're gonna move it towards our phaco, and we're gonna separate. We're gonna separate. We're gonna separate. Oh, that's just horrible. Look at that. So there's only one thing that these are good for, and that's, to have with a cup of coffee. But otherwise, no, absolutely not on those guys there. Ugh, that's terrible. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Do I have to use donut holes for this? The answer is no. You could go to your favorite Indian restaurant and order what's called gulab jamun. Gulab jamun is a fried donut ball dipped in honey or rose water, but it's incredibly sweet. It tastes awesome, and they work just as well as donut holes. So either way you go. But I got to thinking, could I do chopping on a hush puppy? I don't know. So here we go. I've got a hush puppy here. Let's see if we can do, what do we want to do? Let's do chopping. So let's make a little groove here. I have no idea if this is going to work. I'm going to make a little groove here. Ooh, I don't know. And now I'm going to bury my phaco in. Let me change my orientation so I'm inside my wound. All right. And I'm going to bury in there, and I'm going to come through here. This is a hush puppy. It really kind of smells good. And we're going to go down, and we're going to separate. Does a hush puppy work? Yeah, okay. Hush Puppy kind of works. Can I do a heminucleus? Let's do a horizontal chop here. Ooh, no. 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 I'm going to have to say no to the Hush Puppy. That's just no. Donut holes. Donut holes are the way to go. Or gulab jamun. Either way. Okay, now we're going into bonus rounds on this donut module. How can I simulate a really soft lens? And so I'm thinking that if I heat up the donut ball, which I've done right here, this is a piping hot donut ball. It was bubbling and all that. Would that simulate a really soft lens? Could I chop that? Or I have no idea. Okay, so we're gonna, that is a little hot. Okay, so we're gonna very carefully bury into this guy. Ooh, I don't know, it seems kind of tough at this point. So I'm gonna try to do some horizontal chopping on this super hot donut hole. Ooh, that's not working at all. Oh yeah, that's just, yeah. Okay, what about cracking? Does that work at all on it when it's really hot? Let's see if I can get this heminuclei to, I can't really hold it because it's so dang hot. Let's say that I was grooving right there, and now can I separate that? Yeah, not really. Okay, so don't try this one at home. That's a bust right there. So as a dedicated teacher and scientist, we have to do all extremes, I suppose. And so what I have here is a donut hole that I've had in the freezer for 3 hours, 25 minutes. And my question is this going to crack like a really dense nucleus, just a rock hard nucleus? That's what I'm trying to get with this one. So here we go. I'm not going to need that. I'm going to see if I can't groove this thing. Oh golly. Oh, now this is cool right here. No pun intended, but this really is a lot like sculpting into a rock hard black nucleus, and you will encounter those. I'm going through a lot of CDE right now, and I'm getting nowhere. It's just, as you can see here, I've barely gotten through that thing. It is rock hard. So oftentimes when you get into these rock hard ones, they will chop a little easier than spending all that energy trying to crack them. So let's see if I can get down into that thing. At least enough to, come on, baby, get through there. Oh, he doesn't want to do it. Come on. No, that's just a rock hard nucleus right there. Now they do make different kinds of second instruments that are pointed to get through that. Silverstein is one of those. So I don't know, let's take this toothpick here. This will simulate one of those kind of ice pick shaped second instruments. Oh, I can barely even get down with that. And so I'm able to get down a little bit, but no, that thing is, I should have seen this coming. So that's just not gonna happen. But if you do freeze one of these things, you will get a really good feel for what it's like to groove on a rock hard nucleus. And that is what that is. Somebody's gonna chip a tooth on that thing. So that's a no-go. So here's the very last thing I'm gonna show you. Suppose that you live somewhere that they don't make cake donut holes, and all you can find are the fluffy kind. So the question I had was, if I freeze this for 3.5 hours, will it behave more like a cake donut hole than the fluffy kind, whatever that's called? So here it is. I've got this frozen thing here, and I'm going to start to groove on it, and hopefully I have better luck than I had on that frozen cake donut. Oh my gosh. I am making a little bit of progress. Yeah, there we go. Making a little bit of progress here. So I think that I'm going to be able to chop that one. Nah, it's wanting to shelve off. Okay, well, yeah, that really doesn't work either. So nope, if you can't find the cake donuts, then I would find a good Indian restaurant and get the gulab jamun.
Thank you for going through the donut module with me. I hope that you had fun. I hope that you got some tasty donuts to eat after you chopped them up. And I just want to give you a few takeaway points. Number one, make sure the patient is set up the way that you want them. The head is the right place, the bed is the right height, the chair is the way that you want it, the scope set up the way that you want it. As you start operating, if things don't feel right, you have the right to stop operating, pull out of the eye, readjust what you need to readjust to get the patient in the perfect position so that you feel comfortable and can give the best surgery possible. When you are cracking a lens, take your time. It's not a fast motion. The faster you go, the more it tends to shelve off instead of crack properly. So it's kind of a slow cracking motion. Give the tissue time to separate, go down and out, and I think that you'll be pleased with that. When you chop, make sure you have that second instrument in position so that you can chop before you lose your purchase. I find that residents that go through this module start to crack very nicely and efficiently for about 10 to 15 cases. After that, they start having trouble cracking at that point, and it's because we tend to revert back to a horizontal motion. So when that happens, I just say, hey, remember the donuts. And then they start cracking very nicely again. So thank you for spending some time with me. I hope that you have great surgeries and have a great day.